And we are going to start with item 1, membership and membership update. Bruce, please.
Yes, thank you, Alan. 2 items to update in terms of membership update. Members may recall that we had a discussion during the previous 1st of October forum in relation to communications we'd received from Sarah Smith at Scremiston First School. I've subsequently been in touch with Sarah and explained while there is support available, she still feels unable to continue in the role as a schools forum, First School Maintained School representative, so will formally resign as of this meeting. And I'd also belatedly like to welcome Ros Cant to her 2nd schools forum meeting. It wasn't minuted that she did attend the previous October meeting, but I'm delighted that Ros has been able to join us as the Church of England School Diocese representative. So welcome, Ros. It's great to have you on board.
Thank you. Morning.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Luke, do we have any apologies for absence?
I've had apologies from Audrey Kingham, Dave Cookson and Hannah Brown.
Thanks, Luke. So item 3 is disclosure of interest, if there are any. Just a reminder that we all here to attend on behalf of all of the schools in Northumberland, and we represent the institutions that were nominated for rather than their own individual or respective school or trust views. And if there are any interests, please raise them as appropriate in a particular item. So if we move on to item 4, which is the minutes and matters arising, I know that Bruce has got something we'd like to raise in respect to item 6, which was the free school meals check-in item. Bruce?
Yes, again, if we just go through in terms of accuracy and matters arising at the same time, there is just one item which I should have noticed on page 1 of the minutes. Again, apologies to Joe Holmes from Malvern's Close. There is an L just in an A. We've just got a correction to make there. But I don't know if there are any other issues in terms of accuracy for page 1. Page 2. Again, we've picked up Sarah Smith already in at 0.1.1.
Bruce, I can see that James has got his hand up.
Hi, sorry. It's just a matter of accuracy. I don't want to sound pedantic, but my surname is IOT, not OIT, and I work in a college, not a collage. So,
well spotted, yes.
But thank you. It just shows I did read the minutes.
Working in a collage sounds more fun, actually.
Maybe that's the solution. Yes. Well spotted.
Thanks, James.
Yeah. Okay. Page 2. Something in terms of page 2. Page 3. It's largely dealing with Sue's report on the SEND capacity strategy. Page 4. Again, just under item 6, I would just like to again, subsequent to the schools forum last meeting, I was delighted to get an email from Keith Faulkner, who I know was on the call, just again thanking us for the work in relation to the free school meals campaign and the potential impact that will make for schools in Northumberland. Again, we do it for all the right reasons, but it was I was delighted to get your report, Keith. Thank you to get your email, Keith. It was much appreciated. Thank you. Okay, page 4, page 5. I think we've got an update in terms of the work programme and meeting dates, but we'll pick that up under the respective agenda item. And page 6.
Just a typo there, Bruce. I know we think the high needs block's a bit troublesome, but I think defecate is probably the wrong word.
Well spotted.
It's there a few times.
Yes. And that's some things a spell check won't pick up. Look, can you pick that one up for us? Yeah. I'm minded to tell a story when I did a report as a young, fresh trainee accountant 30 years ago, talking about the new budget settlement and the £8 billion investment in public expenditure, except I omitted the L from public. And again, nobody would pick that one up in terms of a spelling check either. Okay, thank you for those corrections. Are there any other comments or matters arising in relation to the minute?
So is everyone happy for me to agree and sign those as a true record?
Aye, with the alterations, Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, free record.
Good, thank you. Okay, we move on to item 5, which is communication, and there's quite a lot of information in there, particularly in the Institute of Policy Review paper, and obviously Bruce has included the correspondence between the Secretary of State regarding the SEND white paper and the F40 group response to that. Bruce, is there anything in particular you would like us to draw everyone's attention to?
I think just under the first item, in terms of agenda item 5, happy to pick up any points for discussion which any members want to pick up. Again, previously at the last meeting, we produced the Education Committee, Public Accounts Committee white paper in terms of solving the SEND crisis. There is a lot of information in circulation in relation to the profile, particularly around SEN at the moment. And again, I think it's probably worth just highlighting the 5 key recommendations, which are on page 17 of the agenda pack. I think it was approximately page 5 or 6 of the report, highlighting, again, an education system for an inclusive society, where I know there's been a lot of discussion currently on an inclusive education system, but I think that's probably taking it one step beyond that. A new model that delivers better support sooner. Recommendation 3, build capacity by rebalancing funding and investing in the workforce. I'm intrigued to see in terms of the detail, in terms of what that rebalancing funding could quite consist of and how that would work. But again, we'll see what emerges in terms of white paper around that. Item 4, incentivize inclusion by making it a core part of school improvement and accountability. Again, I think there would be some support across forum in relation to that. And recommendation 5, highlighting the need to retain existing education, health and care plans while the system, during the period of system reform. Something I can see Graham has his hand up.
Yes, Chair, Bruce. Obviously, I read this report, being Chair of High Need. The 5 recommendations, I would think we should really look at these when we meet as a High Need Committee later on in December. I think they're well worth looking at, especially the last one, keeping educational care plans in place, right? Because obviously if we lose that kind of thing, what we're going to do with the children. So that's my recommendation as Chair of High Need. Thank you, Chair.
I think that's an excellent recommendation, Graham. I think it would be a very good use of the High Needs Committee's time to look at that.
Thank you, Chair.
Mike?
Thank you, and apologies, my camera seems not to be working this morning, so it's just voice. But just when I read it through, similarly, it seems like a positive response to the situation that schools and families are in, but it doesn't really answer the question at the minute of how we manage where we are now. So it's a route for the future, but it doesn't really resolve the issues in terms of funding or timeframes or anything of that nature. I didn't think when I read it through, but in terms of reforming it, I think it's the right step.
Thanks, Mike. Bruce, is there anything else you want to say in relation to that?
Nothing else specifically in relation to that. But again, I think the suggestion Graham makes is an excellent one, and we'll agenda it specifically. Whether there any other information emerges when we meet as a High Needs Committee, it's probably worth saying now. I will highlight it under item 9 as well on Friday the 12th of December rather than Wednesday the 10th. It's been necessary just to nudge that meeting slightly. But I'll reiterate that when we get to the programme meetings.
Graham?
Chair, yes, just obviously what Mike's just said, I quite agree, but since the white paper is more likely not going to come out until 2026, I think Northumberland needs to start looking very seriously what we need to do before the white paper, right? Just trying to get ahead of it, because I think we're doing the right thing. You know, if we're gonna rely on the government, reading what obviously in Bridget Phillips' letter, they need more time to look at this and more time to look at that. I think we need to get on top of this straight away.
I agree. I mean, the SEND can has been kicked down the road by successive governments, haven't they? And there doesn't seem to be any real urgency. And well, you've got to balance the taking your time to assess the situation. You know, I think everyone working in schools knows that the situation is becoming absolutely critical, and you know, anything we can do locally ahead of that is definitely worth consideration.
Thank you, Chair, for that. Yeah, I think, you know, obviously something to put on the agenda. Obviously, I think it's going to be an interesting meeting on the 12th now. Thank you.
Do we have any further comments or questions in relation to the communications papers? Okay, thank you, Bruce, for providing those papers, and definitely, particularly in the IPPR report, there's a lot of food for thought and some useful ideas, and I think it's definitely worthy of us having further consideration. Okay, if we can move on to item 6, which is the DSG financial monitoring, which Callum's going to lead us on. So over to you, please, Callum.
Hello. As always, a delight for me to present possibly the bad news, or the negative part. I'll share my screen. You have got within the pack, you've got the prose narrative, which is what everybody's used to with the Word document that goes through every single area in detail. I've kind of put these together, and I've included some of the outturn from the July meeting, just so we can remind ourselves, because we have had a lot of correspondence now from schools asking about underspends and overspends and high needs block and wanting more detail. I was hoping some of those representatives that had asked those questions would take up the opportunity, the invitation to come to Schools Forum, but I can't actually see any here. But it's worth reminding ourselves and making sure everybody's on the same page anyway. So this is the financial performance update. It is September, because we always work a month in arrears, in lag. The team are currently updating budget monitoring of the service for October, and my team are currently out with schools doing their indicative meetings at the moment to see any impacts and what's going on in the school budgets as well. So what we have the overall allocation. So it changes through the year, gets a quarterly update. The latest update gives us 185.855 million, split into the 4 different blocks. And currently the overspend forecast overall is 6.646 million. We had a 8.052 million deficit going into this year, so therefore that overall is currently forecast at close to 14.7 million. Obviously that hides some of the high needs block impact because of underspending across the 3 other blocks. So the total underspend between the 3 other blocks is the 0.651 million, and currently the high needs block facing a pressure of almost £7.3 million. I'll just caveat that we predicted through the legacy, through historic growth, that we were essentially setting a budget that was going to overspend by almost 5.2 million, and we were capturing the growth kind of in expenditure in additional place funding and additional needs, which is essentially the extra £2 million forecast there. So on the table here, you can see the central schools block forecast underspend of 0.227, early years 0.206. You've got the high needs block there and the schools block 0.218. I'll go into the reasons for all of those, but it's just to see the impact. This is just a visualization, so because the DFE requires us to hold it as a bottom line, there are no individual, when it goes into the reserve, there are no individual blocks. It is just to show effectively what would have been the position, how is each block holding up. We do get quite a lot of interest, particularly within kind of regional groups and other local authorities to kind of split out our high needs block. That gets reported regularly, so that we can say we're forecasting on the high needs block alone £19.289 million overspend by the end of this year. So reasons, we'll cover some of these, I think the next slide, yeah. So we'll cover central schools block, early years block and schools block here. So in with the regulations for residential placements and education of residential placements, we've had conversations with the DFE that basically say that any children within residential placements with education that get any SEND support as well as EHCP should be shifted over and funded out of the high needs block. As such, we have shifted some of those costs and it has yielded a statutory kind of underspend on the central schools block. The early years block, again, there's some one-off payments, there's strong uptake, and we have a slightly higher than expected DSG settlement from last year, which has led to a forecast underspend. I will say without that slightly than higher settlement from last year, that would actually be an overspend. But because we've got that and it's currently offsetting one-off payments, we are reporting it as an underspend. Schools block, much of which is the contingency held, looking forward to Berwick schools reorganisation and that coming to a head next September. There is a slight shortfall because of when we were setting the SLAs and pricing of such within the union supplier cover and EAL. These SLAs will be revised this year in line with the deficit, so they will cover themselves from next year onwards.
Callum, if I
Debbie.
can just interrupt for a second. Debbie's got a question.
Sorry, I just wanted to check the dates on this. I did put something in the chat. Is this for the year to March 26? Sorry to be a bit dim about it.
Yeah.
So if there's an underspend in early years, is there any plan to spend that before the end of the financial year? I don't know if David's the right person to answer.
David will come in.
Yeah, Debbie. Obviously, aspire every year for every penny of early years block to be spent on early years young people. It is a tad difficult in that we won't actually know this year's allocation bizarrely until next July. So the final allocation, which is what's happened here, it's recording an underspend because what we got, the final allocation in July of this year, even though it's for last year's, has carried forward. So each year when we set the rates, we try to set the rates to spend every penny because we want to pass on absolutely as much as humanly possible to the front line. That's the aim of it. The fact that we've got a bit left was a knock-on effect from last year, but the influence of that will influence the setting of the hourly rates for next year. There have been some years actually, Debbie, where we've been running it a bit close and we've bumped up hourly rates to the maximum possible and then almost thought that we were going to come in at a loss on that. So it sort of swings both ways a little bit, Debbie, but the plan is that we'll use this information to support the recommendations for hourly rates. and that those rates will be a bit higher because we've got a bit of an underspend currently sitting. The thing is we never actually know until the July of the following financial year whether we have hit the rates right and the expenditure right around that. I hope that makes some sense.
I understand that, but what what I took away from the last meeting was that because we were overall in deficit, we weren't able to carry forward. That won't be lost if it's an overspend by the end of the year, will it?
The Schools Forum, for exactly the reasons, the concern that you've got, Schools Forum for a while now have internally ring fenced and reported from a ring fence position. Like I said, the information will be used in setting next year's rates, and that's the time for us to have the debate on that position. We know DFE culminate all the blocks together to cause the bottom line. That doesn't mean we have to. And like I said, I think it's a positive position that Schools Forum has. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, said we want to keep a very close track on the individual blocks for it to protect against the situation you're alluding to there, Debbie.
Can I just remind you that it is in year. Without that, so the more than expected settlement was about 330,000. So therefore, the in year without that is overspending because we upped the rates because we underspent last year. So to get it spent out, so it is influences next rates essentially to take into account previous year's underspends.
So with that 200...
So settings do get it just built into the rates for the following year.
And that figure wouldn't be lost from this year. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, Debbie, the evidence would be that it wasn't lost from last year's.
It's carried forward and integrated into next year's then, is it?
It influences the rates that we pay. We only know in
forward.
We keep the record. We keep the record of it being carried forward.
So we would be overspending in this year, if that was effectively because we can't carry forward. We cannot carry forward because we're in an overall deficit. We set the rates to overspend this year. It just so happens we got in July, past year end, we got over the expected.
Sorry.
Go on.
And we've got another 3 months before the end. So if that figure is estimated now, is it not more prudent for us to make sure we use that figure, because we may be underestimating what the DSG will send us, and that figure could become higher then. So are we not better, knowing that that's the figure that's estimated now, to be using that money before the end of March for that block, and then to be creating,
I suppose, but then
on basis of there being at this stage in the year an underspend?
I suppose, but that is forecast to year end. It's not a done deal. It's not a sure thing, and it's dependent on DFE final settlements. But it would also then influence the rates not going up as much as they possibly could. So it's 6 or 2 3s really, but we'd be telling providers that we're not essentially putting their rates up.
Probably just worth adding, Callum, as well, and just sort of supporting what David said earlier. Obviously, the reference, obviously, David and Callum's made to the sort of not finding out about final EY settlements until July after the financial year. It's because of the heavy influence of the January census, EY census figures as well, which is obviously 2 years off the 2 years, only 2 months before the end of the financial year anyway. As sort of Callum said, we don't, and David's alluded to, we don't anticipate changing our internal practices, which is why we're showing all the figures separately, and is what's enabled us to put up the EY rates by a greater margin than the uplift in the national rates. And that's something we'll look at again ahead of 26-27. But I wouldn't anticipate we'll be doing it in the remainder of this year, because of because we'd still await the influence of the January census on the figure for this year as well. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does sort of.
Yeah, you're asking absolutely the right questions, Debbie. Before this meeting, I said to the folk that were pulling together the information, we will rightly be asked about, well, if there's an underspend in early years, then surely we should be spending it on early years. I think the nature of it is that dependent on forum agreement, but any proposals for hourly rates is influenced by any previous surpluses. In this case, though, actually, last January's setting of the rates for this financial year, we actually, without the extra settlement that came in July, we would actually be in deficit in that block at the rates that were set in that desire to pass on as much money to the front line. We actually possibly miscalculated a little bit, because the hourly rates we set this year wouldn't have been covered unless our July settlement had been positive. And we don't always, it can be difficult to predict the July. And you certainly can't predict it when we're probably setting the rates. So there's a bit of chicken and egg in it. Evidence would suggest. The other thing, Debbie, is that historically what has happened with early years is we have changed rates mid-year, where the July response has been very positive. So the track record is we do look after early years, but you're absolutely right to keep the forum held to account in terms of what we're doing. And the big debate in January will be about hourly rates for the next year, and we'll debate there the reasons for setting those rates and so on and so forth.
Okay. I understand it, but I wouldn't necessarily agree with it. But that's fine. I understand the rationale.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. I'll crack on. So high needs block, we go into more detail here because frankly it needs it. So these are kind of the 6 large areas that we've pulled out from the data. Top up funding currently overspending by 1.943 million. It's continued growth in EHCPs. We were expecting, if the continued from last year, we were expecting this to be where we could effectively see the in-year growth, which is what's happening. Now I dare say EHCPs are slightly less than last year, but I'll hold on to that because we're only in, well, November now. Inclusion, so we have seen a big increase in inclusion, particularly if you look year to year, with 214 permanent exclusions at the time of writing. I'm sure that's gone up now, with quite a few of those. I think it's around 10 EHCPs, primary pupils with EHCPs, which then require very costly bespoke placements. There is high AP costs within there, and the inclusion service is paying for the education side of our secure unit at Kylo House has been for 3 children which we've had in there for most of the year. They have come out now and gone into residential placements, but Kylo House has had 3 NCC in Northumberland children in, and as such we get a charge for the education of that. Legacy deficit is that's essentially what we set the budget knowing the previous year was the previous year's impact will be, so that's your 5.179 million. There is additional place funding. Now this is what I was absolutely expecting to see, because we purposefully didn't set budgets within additional place funding so that we could see the place funding effect on kind of on the growth and see how effective SSBs and the alternative as an alternative to special schools would be. The SSBs have been expanding over the year. they have saved significant amount of funding as opposed to special school places over that year, and they have eased demand slightly within the special schools. So at the moment, it's calculated that the SSBs have saved or will save for this year around £600,000, and that's on top. Obviously, that's taken into account the £167,000 overspend, effective overspend on place funding. Personal budgets is currently forecast slightly overspent with 76,000. Again, we have seen a slight increase in personal budgets, both in terms of the complexity, cost, and overall number. We are keeping a close eye on that and reconciling everything, every penny that goes out, absolutely, as well as anything that's not spent from previous years to attempt to claw back, which is what happened last year and why it didn't overspend last year, despite us at this point thinking it would. Offsetting offsetting some of the overspend with some underspends, we have staff vacancies within the SEND support team. They're short-term vacancies. Over that time, there are plans in place, and there have been filled vacancies in that time. So the very short term, it does happen every year that we have some vacancies across SEND support, which then generates this underspend. But the fact is, they are only ever kind of short term. There is a reduction overall compared to when we were setting the budget of independent school placements. These are expensive placements, averaging, if you look at the national average that the DfE puts out, I think it's £63,000 a year on average for independent school places. We see much higher than that. I can't say we see much lower than that, but there are a couple that are lower than that. But our continued kind of resilience and growth in capacity internally and using the other wherever else we can has actually shown a slight reduction in use of independent places over that time. Yeah, okay. Have we got any questions on this bit before I move on? Graham?
Yes, Callum, in the report that got sent out on the underspend, right? I got 0.180, but you got 0.708.
This is the combined underspends across all the services that are in detail on that report. Yeah. Okay, so right. If you add all the underspends up across that, that's why I've not given it a specific. Much of it is within SEND support.
Okay, thank you for that. Then understand.
EHCP growth. So this is kind of a hark back to July. Growth is still high. 17.07% is the forecast over the year. We are closely monitoring that. We're putting additional kind of processes in place to make sure and track every provision to make sure it adds up exactly. Interestingly enough, and the other reason that I've kind of put this in is because we went to a regional, LA 12 meeting where the DfE told us about regional split between special schools and other is what they called it. So actually our 55% in this other bracket is on par with the highest in the region. It was very much seen as an inclusive and positive thing, which I think it is, but shows and reflects the proactive nature that we're kind of taking to the problem. Now, it is worth also mentioning that other areas of the country, when they compare the Northeast, was overall kind of 60 to 65%. So we are now kind of edging towards kind of the UK, England pressures that we're seeing and inclusive too that we're seeing, but it highlights and clearly the DfE have recognised this, the shift from our practices to get more EHCPs and retain local provision and improve local provision, which is a testament really to everybody on the call. But if you look at that difference over the past, was it 3 years, we've gone from around 42, it was 42%, yeah, 40.2% within the mainstream to 55% over that time. Okay. So looking ahead, these are what we are looking at, what we are doing anyway. So I've already mentioned our kind of close monitoring and changing in processes to better monitor growth trajectories, trends, so that we can further get handles on it. We can decipher into primary needs. We can split off different bandings, ages of children. We're developing kind of dashboards to really pick apart this data. We knew the overall trends, and we were doing a lot of this work anyway. But we're taking it that step further, and I hope to be able to kind of present more in-depth growth rates and things like that. Perhaps next time that we come, or in a year's time, where we can really pick apart what's going on. Developing local capacity. I've talked about specialist support bases and working with other mainstream schools to boost capacity where we can, and using space innovatively. So we know there's a drop in overall pupil numbers in Northumberland. That therefore must come to a more space available. What can we do with that space? A great testament to that would be at Northburn, where converting the classroom, getting a suitable space, and creating the SSB has really helped the local community, helped the SEND need in that area, as well as helping to kind of transform the school from what was a steady decline into looking forward and maintaining the future viability of the school. You should all have had a letter from the High Needs Block, this High Needs Block Spend Control Board, which has been created. And in that letter, we are talking about the rapid reviews. So we're looking at SEND panels, the banding systems, special school funding, and the central scrutiny, in particular to the central teams and the support teams, to make sure that we're not just looking at schools. We're looking internally as well. We're looking at the whole process. Graham, do you want to come in there?
Just mentioned about a letter. I have not received this letter, so I wonder what was it now. So I wonder if I could get a copy sent to me. It would be helpful.
It will have gone to schools, Graham, but we'll certainly forward you a copy of the comms direct. Yeah, no problem.
Here,
Yeah,
thank you
it definitely went to head teachers directly. Sorry, Graham. Just that your head teacher should have a copy, because it certainly for the schools, my trust, it went directly to every head teacher.
Yeah, well, obviously it hasn't been passed on to me or anything like that. So if I could have a copy, it'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll make sure everybody here at least has got a copy of that. And I've talked about engaging with national reforms and DFE in the area, which we are doing. I certainly went to that thinking that we wouldn't be necessarily the leaders in the area, and quickly found ourselves as the innovative directional kind of leaders, which came apparent quite quickly. So we are really, it just reflects the proactive approach that we're taking in Northumberland, and the wide span of the things that we're looking at. We're not just looking at one area, we're looking at every penny spent within the high needs block. Appendix A, which is in the documents, goes into every underspend and overspend by area. So by specific cost centers is how we term it. You'll have a copy of that. If you have any questions on any of the services in there or anything that I've not covered, I'm happy if you want to pick that up either now or outside of this, but just to give you the absolute, as well as the top level and the strategic and that side, but to give you the absolute data as well, so that we're being absolutely transparent in every little area as well as every big area. And Appendix B was aimed at, as you can probably tell, anybody that wasn't here in July, just to remind what the funding situation reflects and how we are being more efficient with our expenditure on per EHCP, how we are trying to kind of show economies of scale and do things better, but even with that and everything that we're kind of doing, the funding isn't keeping pace at the moment, hence why the need for looking at all these things, and frankly why the high needs block spend control panel has been formed. Okay, I think that's the end, so thank you very much. Have we got any questions or anything else that I need to answer? Graham?
Thanks, as always, Carl. It's really clear and helpful to be taking through it in that way. Just a couple of questions and a couple of observations. I suppose the first one, just in relation to the elements of the high needs block that are underspent, and on one hand, that's appealing because that helps to kind of reduce some of the overspend. And Welsh said it was largely rooted in certainly where the high incidence team and the low incidence teams concerned in vacancies that tend to be short term. My reading of that is still amounts to in year an underspend of 400,000, which if you look at that in terms of personnel, that's probably quite a lot of capacity. Whilst it's, as I say, it's a kind of helpful underspend in some respects. Actually on the ground, so these are teams that make a difference in schools and help support inclusion. So that's kind of not an ideal situation, just to flag that. I know nobody
totally
would think it would be, but it's worth just emphasising that the underspend there is actually it kind of exacerbates a problem.
Quite, I agree, and I think that probably David's coming in to tell you about reviews and restructures. David?
Yes. I mean, Callum's summarised some of the things that are under rapid review, as it were, and under rapid review into what that process is at the moment is officers collecting information to come back to partners with, right? Not officers making decisions on how the future has to look, and so the 4 areas that were listed. The rapid review, the SEND panels, and also the banding systems, with a view that we can come back with some options about top up, because we can see as from the Callum's presentation over time how the growth in top up is significantly contributing to the deficit. We're actually meeting with special schools to talk about resources in general, not just pure money things on Friday of this week. And the other one that the Spend Control Board, High Needs Spend Control Board, is looking at is central teams, and that on the face of it, that might look like a look to see where money can be saved by central teams, but actually needs to be broader than that for exactly the points you've made, Graham. Though there might be some apparent savings through vacant posts, there's the invest to save element, which is the point of the central teams, is that they support schools and young people, and therefore support with efficiencies, and therefore better use of the high needs block overall. The rapid reviews that are undergoing currently, and you'll learn a lot more about very shortly when we come to all partners to share the information that we've gathered for some decision making going forwards. The central, it might be interesting to see what the outcome is for central teams, and about whether the how they support inclusion in particular, and that as I think you were advocating, Graham, is get those posts filled, because they're going to support schools greatly.
Yeah, yes, that's the point. But thanks for that. Thanks for talking me through that. Just a couple of other things. Callum, I might have misunderstood this. That you were pointing to the percentage that have moved from the special schools into the mainstream, and suggesting that that was looking good. In the pack, the earlier papers, there was a kind of PowerPoint section around the growth in EHCPs, and within that there was a slide. I think it was listed as slide page 51 of that pack. Seemed to me to be saying that we're behind the national, and only 44% were in mainstream, and that aligned with the regional. I think the figure that was on that slide was 49% for the national. I was going to ask the question, what is the challenge there in relation to us being behind the national in terms of the proportions in mainstream? What's the understanding as to why that is? And then obviously the later figures look quite different to that. So probably my misunderstanding, but if you can talk me through that, that'd be helpful.
I'm sure David and Bruce will want to come in on that. I think there's been a lot of change in the past year and a half, and it's probably the lag on the numbers. But I'll let David come in.
You're spot on, Graham, and it's good that you're keeping a watch on the numbers. The information really that we've culminated for later on in the agenda isn't quite as updated as what Callum's presenting here. And the point of it, which I think Bruce will probably mention, is to talk about the trends over time occurred within there. There's some different time scales for the data points. So some of the data points are actually 2024 as the most recent, because that's come from DFE census, which hasn't been updated again yet. So some of it is a bit time delayed. The point of the slides really, though, for those ones is to look at the overall, but what Callum's presented today is accurate. The other one where there's sometimes some gaps between the data is whether, for example, we could be looking at EHCPs, and we might present it sometimes where it's EHCPs for school age, so 5 to 16, as opposed to sometimes you look at a figure for EHCPs which is 0 to 25. So sometimes slides aren't clear enough on that, and we do need to work on that to try and demonstrate. But if you do spot any immediate differences, it should be nuanced, not massive. And the slides that are coming up for later on are about looking at the trends over time. But these ones that you're looking at right now are absolutely accurate for right now.
Yeah,
this particular report.
I did this in the end of September with a fresh set of reports. So it's absolutely up to date for September.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. I see Bruce is about to come in, and then I'll make another point. Thank you.
Again, it's just reiterating what Callum and David said. The information in the following agenda item is historic, going back to late 2024, because it's about what's published, and we have the comparators both regionally and nationally. So that's the late 2024 CEN2 data collected January 25, and then subsequently published in June. Whereas, as Callum said, in relation to our data, we're obviously able to provide a current position or as near a current position as possible. We don't have the comparators in relation to that. I think what is consistent and evident between the two sets of data is the direction of travel, and that's the key thing. And I think obviously in Callum's data here we have the independent special schools, mainstream provision, everything else, which we also have, whereas in terms of the EHCP data, we have a lot more detail in terms of post-16 provision, FE college, etc., and of course CY.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. And actually, it probably kind of adds emphasis to the point that things are moving in the right direction, as you've said. If the figure in 24 was, whatever it was, 44%, and it's, in a relatively short space of time, it's moved up to 55, then that, that is testament to those efforts.
It's been
sorry. I've got something to say.
Sorry, the biggest single influence on that that period would be the SSBs, Graham.
Yeah. Okay. And then I know we're coming on to the later PowerPoint pack on EHCPs and where the figures up to date. We said the EHCP data largely is, and it was suggested back in 2019 that the NCC was largely in alignment with the regional and the national, but over the last few years it's grown much more significantly. I think that we were all around 3 to 3.5%, and then NCC on thumbs up at 7%, whereas nationals low 5%. Is there an understanding, or what is officers' view as to what is the reason for that? Is it just a reflection of need? Is that the conclusion? It reflects need, and we're meeting a code of practice obligations. That's just a reality in Northumberland, or is there a sense actually some poor calls have been made and some decisions been made that are skewing us in the wrong direction compared with the national? And I think that's significant because if the high needs spend control panel is going to get into this, they need to be making sure that actions that then follow are well informed by a good understanding of what the issues might be. And if the issues are actually it's about meeting needs in relation to our code of practice obligations, then that's one thing. If there are areas where actually we've made some poor calls in relation to the national, that maybe these are the areas that need to be targeted. So where is the thinking around that?
I wonder, Graham, whether it's worth picking that up under the next agenda item when we've got that table in front of us, perhaps.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, yeah. Right. Final question, and Callum, you kind of alluded to this a bit in some of your commentary around liaising with the DFE, but there was a line in the last part of your written report for this item that we are on, which was along the lines of the DFE's input has been valuable in shaping the approach, and I just wanted you to flesh that out a bit. What did you mean by that?
So this is in particular in relation to our fundamental changes with the SSBs and the consultation that we've had with them to get them kind of formally set up, revise place funding, and go through a lot of the kind of do's and don'ts with mainstream SEN units or ARPs, which they have had their input in, and they've tailored it to lead us to this position, which has yielded, compared to special school places, over kind of 500,000-600,000 in theoretical growth mitigation in that sense.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, do we have any further questions on this item? No. Okay, so thank you, Callum, for that really comprehensive presentation and an update. And obviously, as we can tell by the question, the next item, item 7 on the SEND data is intrinsically linked with the financial outturn. So I'll ask Bruce to move on to that item.
Okay. Thanks, Chair. Again, if I share my screen, I'll use all. briefly through the report, the presentation. Seeing that now. First slide is really, again, it's implied in the growth of education, health and care plans, but that's a result of a parallel rise in the number of requests that are coming through. Again, instead of pulling through from historical data going back to the 2024. We then, and again, that's in terms of reflecting that as a percentage increase. Obviously, the drop in 2020 was around COVID in terms of, remember that. And again, in terms of the number of increases, we can see that while sort of nationally and regionally, the increases have tended to drop, they've stayed broadly at the same level in terms of Northumberland, if I'm taking an average of the previous 3 years. Active number of plans in terms of, again, July 2025, where we had obviously internal data as in relation to that, we were numbering 4,159. Can see that essentially, over the lifespan of this graph going back to 2018, they've essentially doubled in that time. The level of increase was significantly lower during that, those initial sort of a couple of years pre-COVID, but we've seen a sharp spike sort of since that. And again, that reflects the same figures in terms of the percentage increases year on year. That's essentially, some of the figures which I think Graham was alluding to previously, that essentially of our sort of, children and young people population, we have 7% now with with an education, health and care plan. And again, we can see the significant rise in that compared to smaller rises both on a regional and a national position. And again, for those of you who prefer these figures in a chart, there we have those, those figures in a table, should I say. And we can see essentially, that reflects a percentage of the education, health and care plans. 7%, which is the obviously joint fifth highest percentage in the country. Again, following on from what Callum was saying earlier, what we have seen is a significant rise in the number of students who continue to be supported in mainstream with an education, health and care plan. There's been wider messages about an education, health and care plan. It simply doesn't is no longer simply a passport to special school, and that's reflected in those numbers. And again, the figures here in terms of, because of the national comparators do go back to 2024, but again, we can see the trend in terms of significantly increasing, and that will be sort of emphasised, when the next year's figures are available. Less so in terms of both nationally and regionally, where they haven't seen the same level of increases. And again, numbers in maintained special schools and special academies, again, have risen over the course of the last 6 years. Good reasons for that. First and foremost, in terms of, special schools, and again, some of whom are represented on the call have done everything they can to accommodate additional pupils wherever that was possible. We've obviously also seen the opening of the Gilbert Ward Academy in September 23 as part of those figures, providing additional capacity. But again, in terms of, it's been largely about using every inch and using sort of imaginative sort of solutions in terms of adding additional capacity to our existing special schools. And again, what we see is, and again, it's a natural product of the rise in the overall sort of pupil plan numbers. We've seen increases in mainstream school numbers. So while the overall numbers in our special schools have increased, the percentage as a percentage of the overall plan numbers have dropped. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, we have, because this is providing comparator data, we only have this, this is lagged, this is older data in terms of those comparisons back to regional, regional and national averages. Again, yeah, individual local authorities are there as well in terms of the CEN2 published data set. The final slide in the pack again was just in relation to EHCP data and PECs, you know, because we are seeing an increase in relation to that. And again, that's something we've talked about elsewhere, not at today's meeting. And it's, you know, again, what we're seeing essentially is an overall increase in terms of permanent exclusions and, you know, temporary exclusions, suspensions. But we can also see the, you know, the increasing numbers who have SEN or SEN support as in relation to that as well. You know, increasing from 3 or 4% of the exclusions in 2018-19 to 11% of 13 for 24-25, and that's specifically around the plans. It's mirrored to a lesser extent around its SEN support level, but that's reflected in the suspensions data as well. Stop. I mean, obviously, it links to the previous presentation by Callum. I'll stop and take any questions. James?
Yeah, this is not really a question. It's more of an observation, and I think you've just covered it off, Bruce, which is obviously you can see the PECS rate going down slightly, but obviously the suspension rate going up. And I've noticed it in my own school, which is there's a little bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul by lowering PECS, but struggling with a growing suspension rate. You know, it sort of it belies a bigger problem. So not a question, more an observation, but it doesn't mean that there aren't still continued issues with managing kids, particularly with SEMH in the mainstream setting, which is a challenge.
And again, you know, they're 24-25 figures that which booked the trend to an extent, as you're saying, James, in terms of with a small decline. I'm not sure that will be playing out through, you know, the latest figures as well, as we say. I think we reported 200 earlier. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, James. Okay. Any other questions in relation to obviously the EHCP data set and the national and regional comparators? Okay, if we're happy to move on, Chair. Oh, sorry, Debbie.
Debbie's got a question.
Sorry, it's not really a question. It's more of an observation. I'm on an awful lot of forums, particularly with reception teachers and early years, and there is a huge swell in concern about the formality which is encroaching in reception classes required from a top-down approach, and I do think that will be contributing significantly to increases in EHCP applications in early years. So I'm just going to comment on that, but nationally I feel that the true early years approaches that have been worked really hard upon by a lot of early years practitioners since the national curriculum and the EYFS came in 2000, the last 25 years, is gradually being eroded by that. And I think that's something that our youngsters with additional needs find very challenging. So I can't see that changing unless the top-down whole being ready to sit in reception, which I really have lots of issues with. Unless that changes, I can't see any reduction in moving applications to EHCP is going to take place, because we're trying to encroach on children's freedom of spirit at very early age. And for some children, even that a couple of years later or 1 year later, allowing them that reception age to be fully exploratory and curious is being really limited at the moment, and that's more and more apparent across many schools. So yeah, from an early years point of view, I'm really very sad about that, and I feel that is contributing to the increase in year applications, but I can't see it changing. Sorry, it's not a question, it's just a contributory factor and a contributory area that I think has impact.
Graham?
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, just to pick up on the my kind of earlier question, which is about that higher rate of growth in Northumberland in comparison to the regional and national over the last several years. What is officers' take on that? Is it that we're getting something wrong, or is it just a reflection of the realities in Northumberland?
Do you want me to come in, Alan? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, David. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, no. There's a number of factors, Graham. You can imagine it does focus the mind when you suddenly find out you've gone from 96th in the country to 5th in the country over a period of time. Then yeah, it definitely takes some looking at. There are a number of positives about this. It's not all from a negative perspective, and there are some neutral points about this as well. From a parental perspective and from early identification, then actually a higher number of EHC plans would indicate that in many cases parental wishes are being met, and also that it's a reflection of early identification. We though it doesn't always feel like it, I appreciate what I'm about to say next, but compared to nationally, some of our health waiting times in Northumberland are actually quite low compared to others. So it could be that the national picture will catch up with us once they've actually completed the diagnosis pathways, etc. And that actually possibly because some of our health colleagues in the North East are doing a good job in many cases, that actually is providing the evidence for the EHC plans. So there's a connection there. There is a connection, or possibly a connection around rurality as well. Though we've got a number of excellent, really large schools, we've also got some excellent, rather small schools. If regardless of your type of school, if you're a large school and you've got 4 learners with a hearing impairment, it's a regular part of everyday life within the school. You'll have a number of staff just generally trained, Makaton or what have you. It'll be on the training list for all staff about how to interact and support those young people the best. If you're in a tiny school in the middle of nowhere and there's a hearing impaired learner comes onto your roll, that might be the first learner in 10 years with those needs to arrive at your school, and therefore it's more likely that you will need additional resources in order to meet their needs, as opposed to a school that's used to having those needs met on a daily basis. And I've used hearing impairment, but you can delete hearing impairment and put in any special educational need you like. So I think there is a rurality factor that influences it. Just a bit of context to it is that we have and continue, and you'll possibly have heard me say this before, that all applications for EHC plans are endeavoured and progressed absolutely in line with the code of practice. 2-part test. Could the learner have a special educational need, which is usually fairly easily covered, and does the school require additional resources to meet that need? And that's where most of the debate goes on from a plan perspective. So we can't change the thresholds because they're in law. We apply the thresholds as well as humanly possible and keep referring back to them to do so. But the information for you really is that probably 3 years ago, we were looking at maybe 90 to 95% of applications went on to get a plan. Whereas now we get many more applications, up to 1,000 expected this year, but actually we're about 25% of those don't lead to a plan being made. It might lead to interventions and support from central services to a school. It might be that it doesn't mean that those learners have been turned away. They're still having their special educational needs met. But applying the same rules, but with a greater number of applicants, has led to an increase in the turn down rates. But we are still getting more learners than ever, hence the growth. coming through with a plan. So there's quite a lot of factors in there, Graham. It's fascinating, and we do need to keep talking about it just to try and keep our consistency and transparency as high as possible.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, David. I think it is really important that we do understand the aggregation of each school's activities in this area. But what's it saying when we look at the national picture and what conclusions have been drawn, and the analysis is looking at the different phases, the different parts of Northumberland, different schools. What's that picture looking like? And I think I know there's been a lot of focus on this over recent years. There's been changing personnel, so maybe some things get picked up and looked at and possibly carried through, others possibly not. You'll have a better idea than me of that, but just from a schools forum perspective, just to know that really sort of granular analysis has been undertaken, and that's informing the strategies to reduce the overspend. And I know there was a reference to the letter from Audrey about some of the actions, for example, the pausing any additional top-ups, which I think you understand action needs to be taken, but it's really important that it's honing in on what the issues are, rather than just a kind of cost-cutting exercise and to do with numbers rather than realities. I absolutely get how difficult it is, but I think that principle of approach is really important. Okay, that was it. Thank you.
Bruce, do you want to respond?
It wasn't specifically in relation to Graham's point. I think that's been covered, but essentially there's also been a question through Debbie in the chat about the respective split between primary and secondary, whether we're seeing, I think, higher numbers, higher growth rates in in primary. And there was a final slide that was in the original pack, which picks that up to an extent in relation to the current position anyway. Again, that's the current data dashboard looking at 4,183 plans, and we do see that breakdown between sort of primary age or preschool primary age and secondary age, where essentially almost the primary is catching secondary in terms of numbers, and I think that's something we certainly wouldn't have seen going back 5 years. That is, as David said in the chat, one of the key areas in terms of growth rates for education, health and care plans, just in terms of the age of students anyway.
Thanks, Bruce. Any further questions on this item? Okay, thanks, Bruce. Next paper is also yours, so it's the national funding formula and the consultation that we require on that. So over to you again, Bruce, please.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Again, this is a paper we bring every November in relation to the overall funding position and a formal consultation with schools and a formal request to Schools Forum in relation to anticipated settlements for next year. As I outlined at the 1st of October meeting, there has been a dearth of information from the DfE in relation to school funding for 26-27 at this point. My previous report in October outlined the fact that other than the rolling in of some grants into the main schools block DSG for 26-27, we haven't seen a great deal of information other than that. And I think really this paper needs to be seen in the context of the wider agenda, where we're still demonstrating the increasing financial pressures despite the mitigating actions taken and the overall growth in EHCP numbers as part of the wider Northumberland environment at this point. There are some very specific recommendations which we will go through as we pick up the individual parts of the course, as are required by the DfE in relation to some areas around the disapplication request. The disapplication request, again, is a formal application to the DfE to disapply the usual school funding regulations. We don't do that lightly. We're doing that in sort of an advised position on a number in relation to a number of very specific cases, and certainly in relation to some of the the premises requests which we identify. That's important in terms of bringing additional DSG into Northumberland in respect of that. But again, we'll go through those specific issues, those items of the report. A reminder also that in terms of, as a result of this report to Schools Forum, a subsequent schools consultation, which will take place following this meeting and end in, mid-December, we will prepare a cabinet report in relation to the final proposed outcomes to go to cabinet in January, following the receipt of the school funding settlement, which we anticipate in mid to late December. And a very Merry Christmas to you all. And essentially, we will report back on that to Schools Forum at the 21st of January meeting, ahead of the final return that goes to Schools Forum, that goes to the DFE on the 22nd of January. Background, as we said, in terms of the paper, and again, I'll share just as I work through it, if it helps sort of focus. Again, very little information published in relation to either national funding formula or school funding for 26-27. The usual cycle was sort of punctuated and paused because of the general election in 2024, and essentially it's never something that's been re-established. Again, as I've said, no information published as of yet. We've published we've again reshared the current 25-26 values for information, Appendix A, and that's essentially where we are currently. If I go down to those figures at the point, it's probably worth reminding Forum that essentially for 25-26 we were unable to fund the national funding formula in its entirety, even using some of the options we've used previously around capping and scaling, reducing increases and the such like. Essentially, that was a result of the schools funding system we're currently operating in nationally. Schools will undertake, and Schools Forum will remember and has indeed supported the exercise we've undertaken in terms of increased free school meals numbers as an important form of support to our schools, thereby increasing pupil premium and subsequently school funding formula because of the importance of free school meals numbers and Forever 6 in the schools funding formula. The harsh reality of that is, though, that we don't receive funding for them until the subsequent financial year, so 18 months later, which is why essentially we were sharing out an allocation through greater numbers than we would have originally had. So, which is why we couldn't meet their national funding formula last year. We took a broadly even approach. We were roughly 1% under the some of the key formula values in relation to ORPU and free school meals figures. Important in terms of communication reports as well. We worked to rounded figures in relation to that, rather than arguing about 27 pences per pupil. I think it's important when we're communicating and discussing the approach. It's an approach I would still advocate and take. But essentially, that's where we are currently. It would be smashing, but I can't at this point fully confirm that we'll be able to move back to national funding formula. I think that will still be a significant challenge, but that's dependent on the settlement when we receive that in December. Again, if I return to the report. Again, just a brief outline in terms of dedelegation. We don't anticipate any significant changes to dedelegation for 26-27. Dedelegation obviously affects our maintained schools and maintained schools only, and we'll bring formal proposals to the the January Schools Forum in respect of that. Again, where Callum's already alluded to, the cost of reorganisation arising in terms of Berwick. We've talked about some of the exercises we've done around boosting free school meals number. There's some of the, in terms of the free school meals eligibility checking. and also trades union facility time and support to those students who have English as an additional language. So again, we anticipate that we will seek delegation again in respect of those services, and we'll bring a formal proposal to January's meeting for maintained members to consider in respect of that. Outlined earlier in terms of disapplication requests, again, Forum and the wider education sort of population will be aware in terms of reorganisations in relation to both the Coquet and Berwick partnership areas. Last year, we sought and you gave agreement to a disapplication request in relation to Coquet, which was essentially ensuring that funding was distributed with the basic principle that the funding follows the child, where students were being retained into year 5 and year 6 to complete the transition to two-tier primary secondary education in Coquet. And at this point, no further disapplication request or adjustment is required in relation to that. But September 2026 will see essentially the second year of the reorganisation in Berwick, and the implications for that is outlined in terms of the 2 bullet points there, in terms of the retention of the year 5 students by the primary schools and the transfer of the current year 6, 7 and 8 students from the respective middle schools to the expanded Berwick Academy in order to complete that transition to a 2-tier system with primary and secondary education again. We do need to make, because we are not applying standard school funding formula approach on that, we do need to make a disapplication request in relation to the DFE in relation to that. And again, at the end of the report, I'll seek Schools Forum's agreement to that in the, at the end of this report. 6.2, the report dealt with essentially the long-standing premises disapplication request we've maintained for a number of years now. We have what's defined by the DFE as exceptional rental costs in relation to 3 schools where they consist of more than 1% of the DSG. This results in additional funding coming into those respective premises factors. So again, we will we will be seeking the agreement of Schools Forum to a disapplication request across both Seaton Dalrymple First School, Beaufront First School, and obviously the new Astley High School in respect of that. And last but certainly not least, in terms of the block transfer, as featured elsewhere on the agenda, as reported over the last few years in terms of being the key tenet and discussion item in terms of Schools Forum, we in relation to any potential transfer from the schools block to the high needs block, I think it's worth re-emphasising at this point, of course, that's essentially, we're recycling and redistributing because of the increase in top-up payments. We are simply recycling and redistributing those, that element back to schools. Callum's report earlier obviously did refer to underspending in terms of the internal NCC staffing teams, and there are clearly pros and cons in relation to that. But we know that the pressures in relation to high needs are essentially the result of the increased number of education, health and care plans, and by virtue of that, the increase in top-up payments we're making in respect of that, both to our special schools and increasingly to our mainstream schools as well, to help support them, support our students. The figures we've actually reported have actually been nigh on spot on, and again, we are forecasting now there's currently that £19 million high needs deficit to the point at March 2026. A reminder, last year, in terms because we are changing the approach for this year, we came to Schools Forum initially, and after much debate, essentially as advised by the DFE, it had brought a 2-phased approach that essentially would sort an initial request to transfer up to 0.5%. From the schools block to the high needs block, because that could be done without any further Secretary of State approval if the agreement to Schools Forum was given. We then sought a request seeking an additional transfer of up to an additional 0.5%, so up to 1% total, which would require Secretary of State agreement, even if agreed by Schools Forum. As we have done at other times over the last few years, that it's important in relation to those requests we're asking for agreement up to, because as was the case last year and had happened previously, following receipt of the overall settlement in December, looking at the overall sort of schools block as well as the high needs block, a decision was subsequently taken and reported to Schools Forum in January that we would essentially seek just the first part of that, the 0.5% transfer. Again, historically, Northumberland's request has varied between 0.25% and 1% in line with the overall prevailing high needs position at the time. I think in respect of all the information that's been to the forum today and in recent meetings, it will probably come as no surprise to anybody what it's the local authority's intention at this point to seek a request of up to 0.5% transfer from the schools block to the high needs block for 26-27. Again, providing some context, looking at last year's schools block of 244, just nearly 245 million. That transfer would be, 1.225 million, or roughly £32 for each, reception to year 11 student in Northumberland. So again, we're requesting the agreement of Schools Forum to the transfer of up to 0.5% on that basis. Again, it's probably worth elaborating at this point. I'm very specific in terms of using the term up to 0.5%. That's specifically around, in terms of when we subsequently act under delegated powers in January. Should Schools Forum agree to transfer up 0.5%, that's simply around, what we have done in the past is rounded very marginally. If it means we can simplify and maximise the value to the school, so we might have taken 0.498% rather than 0.5%. It doesn't mean, and again, this comes as a disappointment or a surprise to anybody, it's likely to be 0.1, 0.2 or 0.3%. It's simply a technical thing when we come to balancing the overall DSG. Following today's meeting, we will go to a formal consultation with schools. I would like to spend some time looking at the draft consultation document I've attached at the back of the report to find out whether or not we're asking the correct questions and explain on the point the questions we're asking before we come back for formal review of the recommendations. So I'm just going to go to the Appendix B. Again, we're setting some context. We've dropped in information we've received to the meetings this morning in terms of the continuing rise in overall education, health and care plans. There's obviously been an issue in terms of the image being cut there, but essentially we've dropped that figure in there. We know we're spending over £7 million more than we'll receive in the current year in relation to SEN. Estimated deficit will contribute the overall high needs block cumulative deficit of 19 million by March 2026. To eliminate that would, in theory, take a transfer of 7.8% from the schools block to the high needs block. But again, I'm emphasising that when that's not being proposed, but it's just there as an illustration, really, of the extent of the challenge facing Northumberland or high needs funding currently. Again, for those obviously wider school consultees who may not be as familiar with the position as the Schools Forum members, a little bit of background information in relation to the schools block position. While we're not at the quite at the national funding formula values from the Northumberland County Council values, that's something I know that's been replicated through other authorities as well, where we've had discussions through Formula 40 over the course of the last 40 years. So essentially the proposal would be that we would close the consultation on the 15th of December, giving schools in practice about 4 weeks to respond in relation to that. And to be fair to the response rates have been encouraging over the last couple of years. First and foremost, in terms of the discussions, we're seeking support essentially to an anticipated schools forum decision, but clearly we will look at that and anticipate it to that transfer of 0.5%. I think that would be based on last year's figure, and I'll ensure that's range to the 1,225 million, so it stays consistent. And again, my apologies, that needs to reflect the current year's figures. That's as we were last year, or anticipating anyway. I think we'd all settle for that at this point. Is that a helpful question at this point? I think, yeah, again, it may be that we can consider taking that one out, given the pressures on schools. It was interesting last year. It provided some interesting data and discussion points at schools forum. While we had a clear majority in support of the 0.5% transfer, it was mixed around the point around a greater transfer in subsequent years, and it actually helped solicit, some interesting comments on the back of that. Forum have a strong view in terms of whether or not we should leave that question in. We look at that accordingly. We'll take a final view. Yeah. Sorry, Alan, I didn't want to cut across you there. Was there a point you considered?
No, I was just going to say, do we take silence as agreement that we should keep it in?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I have a particularly strong view. I just think it's really important that those that are looking at this understand what it is that we're actually asking, what it means. I think we're immersed in this as the forum and understand it. And I felt last year that perhaps those that aren't party to this on a regular basis might not fully understand the implications. And so, as I say, I don't have a strong view. I think there's a risk if you put stuff like that in without necessarily being clear about the implications, then that doesn't necessarily lend itself to a helpful consultation. So I think if we are keeping stuff in, whatever's in, we do need to be clear what we're asking, what the implications are.
And to be fair, we included fairly consistently that don't know position, which one or two consultees opted for on in relation to some of the questions last year, but it wasn't the prevalent response. People tended to take a position, but I do sort of take that point, Graham. Mike?
Thank you. Just following up what Graham said about maybe a bit of bracketed information on that question, I would leave it in, but maybe indicate what that means, where's it's coming from, what the impact be. So the reduction on DSG and schools budgets proportionately, that'd be useful. Just a short bracketed bit might help.
Okay. Sue?
I think Mike said what I was going to say. I think you just need a bit of context setting around it so people actually understand, even if that's just some links to previous documents and reports that we've already obviously shared with Schools Forum, if people want to read into it. And I think coming on down to the end of the document, there's always the opportunity to send questions in, and probably we'll use a shared mailbox so that information and any questions can actually come in. That can be followed up with phone calls and further conversations if people want additional information. But again, I agree. I think it's really important that people understand the challenges that we've got. So keeping the questioning, I think, is really important for our direction of travel. It's no point hiding the challenges that we face. It's clearly documented in the meetings that we've had with Schools Forum. I think we just need to bring that broader awareness around the challenges that we face with for the future, really. And I think this question helps that. Thanks.
And again, that's why the notional 7% figure is in the initial context. And we do reference the Schools Forum papers, but I accept that's further on the bottom. But yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, Mike, Sue, Graham. Again, in terms of we've based further subsequent questions around some of the questions we asked last year, because again, it's sometimes helpful to sort of chart that change if there is any change, or indeed the consistency of opinion over time, considering the wider the wider sort of high needs control panel work at the moment. But again, obviously we're talking about SEN top-up payments. Again, what the primary objective of a review of the top-up payment system should be. Is it about reduction in the financial payments, a redistribution between schools, to standardise banding ranges, or anything else. And again, we've got a free text box in the bottom. The hardy, the sensitive question around any consideration in terms of school balances. I think we felt there was merit in including that compared to last year, but I know again that's something that schools feel are very engaged and very passionate about. But I think it's helpful to capture that. Again, we still do use notional SEN in line with DFE best practice. Again, and there's a link to their previous document there. Again, it's about whether or not that remains a good targeted use of funding, or it's unaffordable in the current position. And again, it's about how school, the extent we go to ask schools to demonstrate how they're using their sort of total notional SEN in relation to students. Schools are getting certainly better at it, but again, we do sometimes get applications in where schools overlook the need to make their contribution around the first £6,000 notional funding, and I think it's important we just highlight that as well. The question of top-up support to SEND support students without an education, health and care plan, again, we've included that. I think, again, that number has decreased since last year, and I will refresh that. I think it's probably nearer somewhere between 20 and 30 at the moment. So it's something, again, we have acted on and reduced those payments. It would be helpful, again, to gauge the temperature of schools' views in terms of whether that's something we should be continuing to do. And again, two further questions specifically around schools block and how we distribute schools block funding. Minimum funding guarantee. There has been a gradual minimum funding guarantee is essentially one of the controls the DFE use in terms of in relation to the overall school settlement. Historically, it's been limited between 0 and 0.5% or 0 and 1%, which essentially sets an overall per pupil figure funding, which is then replicated across the county. Last year was notable because it's the first time I remember the DFE setting a minus, allowing local authorities to set a minus MFG figure. So the banding we were allowed to set was between minus 0.5 and 0, essentially trying to ensure no cuts in per pupil funding across our schools. We took the position to set that at 0, the highest sort of level possible, to do exactly that. But again, it's about seeking schools support in relation to that. And finally, in terms of capping and scaling, those more experienced members of Schools Forum, remember that historically we have used capping and scaling, which essentially caps any increases in per pupil funding and scales back the level of that increase to balance overall and to enable us to deliver national funding formula values in the past. That simply wasn't possible last year in relation to that. But again, it's helpful to find out from schools whether or not that's something we can do if there is an improvement in our overall settlement position, and that would help us to move closer to, if not to, the national funding formula figures. And again, just as importantly, a free text box to for any further comments. So again, so picking up those comments, are there any other comments in relation to the consultation document? If there isn't, we'll simply return to the recommendations. Okay, if we can work through those on a one-by-one basis, can I ask for Schools Forum support, or if there are any expressions to the contrary in relation to the disapplication request arising from the second phase of the Berwick Partnership reorganisation with effect from September 2026? It's helpful to see that Graham's already, Graham Atkins has had to leave the meeting, but has expressed support for the, the recommendations. Is there anybody who would like to register an objection or any a vote against that recommendation? Okay. By definition, can we assume everybody is in support? Thank you. Recommendation B, support the disapplication request in relation to the exceptional premises factors for Beaufront, Seaton Delaval and Ashley High Schools respectively. As I say, that's not to the detriment of any other schools in terms of, across Northumberland, but it's about maintaining those additional exceptional premises factors. Are there any expressions of dissent or concern in relation to that? Can I take members are therefore in support? Thank you. In relation to the transfer of up to 0.5%, as previously outlined, from the schools block to the high needs block for 26-27, are there any dissenters or expressions of concern in relation to that? Okay, can we take that we have unanimous support to that in this case? Thank you. And thanks for Rose, she's left as well in that case. And again, the D, E and F really is just in terms of outlining the next steps. We will, once the funding is received in, the funding allocation settlement is received in mid to late December, obviously work those up into a viable school funding proposal and bring that back to the schools forum in January prior to submission to the ESFA. Are there any other questions, comments or observations? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bruce. So item 9 is the work programme and meeting dates. But as mentioned before, there is a change to the High Needs Committee proposed date. So that's now the 12th of December at 9 AM. And just in relation to a question that Debbie raised in the chat, any member of Schools Forum is welcome to attend the meeting. I'm sure Graham will say the more the merrier, and there isn't there's no need to join the committee in advance. Anyone could attend that meeting. So hopefully that'll be well attended. So if we could update that when we send out the information, please, to make sure that everyone realises that there is a new date and time.
That will be a virtual meeting, Chair,
Yes.
and we'll send out a Teams invitation to all Schools Forum members on that basis.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. Under any other business, I haven't had anything that's been raised. Is there anything anyone would like to raise under any other business?
Luke, nothing notified yourself?
Okay, thank you very much. So I'd just like to thank everyone for their attendance and contributions today, and we'll see you at the next meeting, which will be on Wednesday, the 21st of January, and that will also be a virtual meeting. So thanks everyone for your contributions to this morning's meeting.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Yes, thank you. It's all right.